I'm really feeling shit. I want to run, but I don't think of it as running. I think of it as moving on. Thoughts are spiraling in my mind. And when my thoughts spiral, it always ends up with I may as well kill myself. Or laugh, but it is painful. I don't want to think about what I'm doing anymore. I don't want to think about why I'm here or what's led to this point or what might follow. When I say this point, I mean living here in Bristol in emergency accommodation after being evicted and abused psychologically and emotionally by one of the other individuals that lived in the house share I was in, and his gang, which consisted of the landlady and the girl who lived downstairs. It's obvious to me, like I've processed it and now I want my external world to move with my internal processing. Otherwise I feel like I'm just steeped in archaic trauma. I don't feel like that progression is mirrored in my reality, and it holds me back. The strange thing is, if I allow myself to ponder about the council providing me with permanent accommodation, I know that the perpetual harassment won't end there, because part of being a social housing or council housing tenant is that you are there for the disposal of the council and their staff and their affiliates and contractors and subcontractors as payment for being paid and being housed. And the same with the government benefits, any state services, police, nurses, NHS, doctors, counsellors, any member of employed society you are at the disposal and the usage of, because that's the exchange for the welfare state. once you've been unemployed for a certain period of time, in my understanding, one's level of awareness and perception shifts about what society's about. And society and the state and institutionalized institutions don't want those people coming back into the workforce. So it becomes, that time out of work becomes the deterrent to employment by employers. And then if you become desperate, any employer that will take you on will know that you're desperate and will be exploitative and manipulative and abusive, because they know how desperate you are to have that job, because you've been unemployed for so long, you have limited options. And the type of people in society that are in those positions take advantage of desperate people. I mean, it's a well-known fact. It's not new news. It's been going on for years, decades, well, since employment existed. And it's the same for educational institutions as well. I feel like a sitting duck. And I feel like society's perception external from me is that, well, if you're hanging around, you're obviously willing to put up with the bullshit, so here you go. I find the limiting mentalities of human existence and life on Earth really stifling and archaic and backward and stupid and juvenile and pointless and damaging. And it saddens me. Like, it's... I feel like it's not natural, it's not normal. And it's so ingrained. There are so many lies, there are so many untruths and cloak and dagger and smoke and mirrors, and I feel like being a human is a full-time acting job. People act when they go to work, and it's so ingrained in them that they don't even realise that's what they're doing. I feel the same about myself. I feel like the medical diagnosis that I've been given means something. And I feel like I only have the capacity to be the aspects of me that I can reflect when in the presence of another based on who they are. So if I'm reflecting, or it's not even reflecting, well, it is, it's sort of mirroring, sort of reflecting, it's a combo. It's like the energetic resonance of that other person, whatever expression it may take, means that my response is in conjunction with their frequency. So very rarely am I able to be my whole self simultaneously and freely, because there aren't many whole free people around. So not only do I respond to people on their level, but I also have the same limitations as what their frequency permits as well. It's like similar to a child. And then obviously there's my own experiences as well that also limit my capacity from my side of things. I miss having a full and varied life with a diverse array of environments and exposure to people and places so that I can experience myself in totality, even if it's a collective totality, so in a day, in a week, or in a month. Whereas I feel like it's so linear here in the UK and England. It's so linear, it's so fixed, it's so archaic, it's so trenched, it's so dense here geographically, like the actual location on the planet, it's so dense. It feels stifling, and the density geographically and location wise is mimicked and represented all simultaneously by the people who live here. So the density is reflected by the architecture and the infrastructure of society in conjunction with the density of its populace on an individual level and en masse. The collective frequency of the UK is low. It varies throughout the seasons. When it gets hot here, it heats up the repressed rage and trauma that has been repeatedly and ritualistically oppressed and repressed within individuals and within sectors of society. And unlike European countries or south of the countries and nations south of the equator, the heat doesn't equate relaxation, it doesn't equate calm, the people here don't flow with the season. They don't adjust their way of living with the season as they come. They maintain the same rigid approach throughout the year, and they call that stability. As opposed to feeling stabilized from the inside out by being in alignment with nature. So here, people perceive stability as an externalized experience as opposed to the internal feeling. It's more frowned upon here to move in alignment with the flow of nature. You can still get things done like they do in warmer climes. Things are still achieved, but the personal experience is different. So it's more socially acceptable here to internalize trauma and instability, to suffer on an internal level, and to self-soothe with addictive behaviours. That's more accepted than it is to live a physically and mentally healthier lifestyle without the orchestrated application of what is perceived to be stability onto someone's life. So it's more acceptable to be rigid consistently throughout the year, but be internally persistently existing in a state of trauma, than it is to shift and move with the seasons and have the stability derived from within, because there's a harmony with self and nature and season and weather and so on and so forth, and eating with the seasons, the seasonal vegetables and fruit, and for example in the hotter climes, to balance that heat, to cool that heat so it doesn't scorch us dry, people will bathe in the sea or spend time near water. It's just not the done thing here. It's just not the done thing. It's seen to be um the done thing to complain a lot. Like, what? Well, I don't feel like I'm complaining. I feel like I'm presenting my understanding, my point of view, my experience, my observations. Um, it feels like a completely unreasonable alien way of living to me. Being on the road or moving consistently throughout my life has exposed me to so many different cultures and ways of doing things, and it never stopped me from achieving in the traditional senses of the word either. I was still able to maintain a lifestyle which was in alignment with my health and well-being, and honoured the seasons and was harmonious in its flow, and deriving stability from the inside out, and do a job and earn good money and have a nice house. I was still able to achieve those things. Whereas here, when we're fixed in a location, the density becomes applied top down. So rather than feeling like stuck in the mud, like where you're pulling your feet out of mud or quicksand, it's like the density is being applied from the top down, like it's oppression, like it feels like like pressure on the head down, rather than being pulled or fixed in a position feet down. Um, it appears to me that people would rather be perceived to maintain whatever the norm is for them and their circles, or whatever they deem the norm to be in that moment, than it is to be true to themselves. Um, for me, England in the UK is governed by a pack mentality. Um, and even though the individuals resent the system, they would rather be oppressed and a part of something than not be in it at all and stand alone, or stand with other people who are independent in their own right. I feel like it's an institutionalized infantilization of the people. The people are heavily dependent on what is dictated to them. Without it, they can't cope. Even if their addiction or dependency on state governance, even if they reject what is provided to them, they still thrive off of the opportunity to openly reject and revile what is being told to them. And without that, they don't know what to do. Um, I feel as my health improves, the harder I find it to stay here. I do feel like I'm a sitting duck, and I also feel like the longer one is fixed to a location, the easier it is to witness, and that the frequency of injustice is palpable. Like, it's a state of being here. It's like a state of being. It's the level of consciousness of the collective. um, in conjunction with the application of protocols and standards and such the like from the state. I know that's quite common across the Western world, what I've just described, but I did most of my adulthood, my transition from into adulthood in a different country, in a different hemisphere, in a different place. Like, I didn't do the most integral part of my growing up in this country. So my understanding of how this country functions is, I feel like it's an incomplete process. And I'm having to revisit so many learning curves again that I did in another country. And it's tiring and it's exhausting. And I garnered like the lessons that came from my learning curve into a different stage of maturity. I still went through that process. It's still valid, even though it was in a different place, a different country. But it can't be applied here. It's really strange. It's so. Even amidst like the density, it's kind of like people don't really mind. It's more like life is about having a less awful lot than it is about enjoying existence. And anybody outside of that dynamic is perceived to be wacky or an oddball or not the full shilling, or that their character isn't as good because they're not putting themselves in the firing line like everybody else is. I've spoken to other friends of mine who've lived in the UK and lived in England, and they were shocked at like the level of misery here and how you will be rejected because of the pack mentality if you don't join in on subjecting yourself to the same levels of misery. If you're not, if you're not gonna join us, then fuck off. I haven't quite experienced it to that degree because I was born here, but I can comprehend where they're coming from with that tack. I'm quite surprised at the amount of people who've like never left. And what that means for people. It does feel suffocating, and it's very easy here to fall prey to the fear. The fear is the motivator, it's the driver for society here. Fear, shame, guilt, insecurity, inadequacy, they're all key drivers, as opposed to healthy motivations or fuel. or reasons to want to achieve or to expand or develop or grow. Like, it's, again, these factors are really obvious and very common worldwide, but in the UK particular, I have noticed that. It's really hard. I'm finding it really, really hard. Shame is used as a tool to manipulate and coerce individuals into joining the pack, otherwise they won't be accepted otherwise. So to be independent and to aspire to achieve things, or to heal from things or whatever, and then move on and let go of what you've been through, isn't the norm. um and they call it things like running away, and um not sticking around to face the music. They use this terminology, and it shames people into remaining where they don't want to be. um there's a dirtiness associated with not remaining in a fixed location for either your entire lifetime, from childhood to old age, or for a very significant period of that time. It's dissuaded against, it's perceived to be greedy. Oh, you just turn up, take what you want, take what you need, and then leave a mess behind you. It's perceived to be irresponsible. Um, you need to get in the real world like everyone else. You need to grow up, get a job, get a mortgage, so on and so forth. Um, when actually, in reality, if it's going by irresponsibility, having children when you're not financially or emotionally stable to do so is irresponsible. Signing contractual obligations for properties that you do not have the financial wherewithal to actually support is irresponsible. Locking yourself into contracts of employment where the job that you're attempting to hold down is grinding you down, affecting your mental health, affecting your physical health, that is irresponsible. But it's kind of like people in England would rather say, or British people would rather say, well, I have to do these things. It's not my fault that I'm miserable because this is the way that it is, rather than actively choose to not make decisions, or to actively choose to decide differently and step away from that pack. They would rather have that misery inflicted on them and then hold their hands up and say, this is the way it is, I've got no choice. They would rather actually really believe that and alleviate themselves of the accountability of stepping up to actually fully mature and grow and take responsibility, because that's a lot harder to do. I understand why my having of this perspective is offensive to people. And I also understand that there are challenges in life that we cannot have ever predicted or prepared for. And I can also comprehend and understand how difficult it is to deal with those when they arise. I feel as though there's an epidemic of inappropriate diagnostic processes. I feel like there are a lot of individuals being told that they have something wrong with them without actually knowing or understanding or comprehending fully what that means. I do feel like an outsider. I do feel like it's difficult for me to relax here or fit in or be productive or reach a state of well-being that is conducive to me being financially self-sufficient, because it's so dense. Working through the bull crap is so exhausting, and I want reserves within me to be able to be happy and healthy and resilient to a degree, but also generate income. So it's quite difficult to pay off debts, for example. It's expensive to be poor here. It's very expensive to be poor. It costs more money to be poor than it does to have an above average income. There's a lot of exploitation, but it seems to be understood and accepted as the done thing, which isn't a bad thing if people are able to kind of get on with it, but for those who don't conform to that mentality, it's quite hard. It's such a sedentary existence in England. It's a really sedentary. Most of the like hobbies or enjoyment tasks that are readily available, sort of to the majority, are there's like people don't go to the beach every week. People don't like go for walks into nature every week. People don't cook together. There's a very reduced sense of neighborhood and community here. I find it really strange. Like I'm craving this sense of relief that comes from me when I'm with people who are consciously aware. But it's not that the people here aren't consciously aware, but there are so many layers and manipulative barriers to that quite often I find it easier to just sit quietly with people. But I do find I am witnessing my own partaking within this whole dynamic. And I suppose that's what's brought me to this video today. And it has been a beautiful day. The sun has been shining. Oh, my flowers. I just feel like Earth is like light years behind the rest of the galaxy. And I can't understand why. I mean, I feel as though England or the UK or Britain is like, it's just not, I don't know, there's not very much going on, if you know what I mean. Like, it's all very surface level. The external experience is very surface level. And I think people are very much switched on in the privacy of their own homes or their own inside themselves. People are trapped inside themselves in this country. It's so sad. Like, I can feel it and I can see it. I watch it on people's faces all the time. People walk around with like they're like this. It's just weird, or like this, and you can just see they're trapped in whatever emotion. It's in their body. It's like living in their body. There's no freedom from themselves. And I can understand why it's like not desired to be free of it, because that seems to be the only thing that unifies the collective. So if you're free from that stress, from that domination of fear and panic and misery and regret and shame and guilt and insecurity, if you don't have those things, there's very little to connect with people on. And any connections that are derived with the foundations based on those emotions, if someone moves through them, then that relationship or friendship or dynamic is no longer desirable, because the roots of that connection were based in something that one or both of those people have moved beyond. Very frequently in my experience do people share their whole selves. I mean, I'm not saying at the time, but it's like, I'm sad, I'm mad, I'm bad, I'm angry, I'm sexy, I'm flirty. It's like people have one thing that's their thing, and anything outside of that is perceived to be instability, because they're being more than one thing. So people cling to their labels, which again is normal in this instance, or the usual, I suppose, in some way. But it's just so far from like what I know to be true and normal in life. And I mean, I've noticed this in my own relationships. When I've moved on from a period of my life and other people are still in it, there's a lot of pain and rejection and resentment there. And that's why people are shamed. Oh, you're running away, or you've abandoned me, or you've left me behind, or you're not the same person that you used to be. Well, are we ever the same person that we used to be? We're constantly changing, we're constantly evolving. It concerns me. Like, I find it like, I suppose it is what it is, really, in a way, isn't it? But I am like I am trying to find the healthiest ways of existing in this dynamic. And like where to find a balance that is conducive to at least a partial like alignment with, how do I put that light on? It's way bright. With like, also my family aren't very nice people. Oh, the sun is so nice. Let's have the natural sun. Look at that sunlight. Beautiful. Like, I don't like them very much at all. Like, any of them, really. It's not that I actively dislike them, but if we weren't related, I strongly believe that none of us would be in communication with each other at all. And that's something, like, I think quite a few of my family members have, like, long ago reached that conclusion, and I'm a little bit late to the club. Better late than never. Like, I didn't know, but apparently it's, like, common knowledge that we kind of like suffice it, like suffice. We kind of like put up with each other because we share blood, which I guess is, you know, I mean, I do the same. So, but oh god, I went on such a long walk yesterday. I also hate the medicalization of everything here. There's no onus on patients to take care of their own health. There's a very high dependency in conjunction with what I was saying earlier, like on a psycho-emotional level, but also on a physiological level. There's a chronically high dependency on the onus of being fixed, being on the other. Which is what we've been taught, which is what is taught in England, you know, so you can't really blame people for that. It's not even about blame. It's just like a level of awareness. Like, I know for a fact the medication that I take is causing potentially long-term irreversible effects upon my body that I'm going to have to live with. However, if I choose not to take them, it gets logged on a record which is shared, and it gets logged as non-compliance. It is impressive on one level how far this country's gone to maintain its status quo. Like, it is impressive on one level. It really fucking is. On another level, it's shocking. And I comprehend that to a degree. It would be, it is very much this way in every country, but there isn't a very good balance in this country. In my opinion, the general consensus is excessive working and excessive distraction or self-soothing. I mean, it had that in Australia, but I do feel like Australia moved, and other countries to be fair, but I feel like Australia moved with its own generations a bit more smoothly, and there was like a different integration there. It's a very new country. It's a very different well, it's younger. It's just younger as a nation, as a country. So also because of like the lack of like general outdoor like living and like the connection to nature, I feel like the mental imprisoning of people here is like the biggest preventative to connecting with nature. But also like it's very gender specific here. So like, girls wear pink, boys wear blue, women have babies, men go to work. Similar to Australia, but like I say, I feel like with Australia there was more of an integration of an intergenerational shift, whereas here the oppression is just passed down, passed down, passed down, passed down, passed down, and it's called tradition. And it's stifling and it's archaic, and the younger generations aren't being allowed opportunities to move within their own bounds because there is no pre-existing infrastructure or fabric within which they can do that. It's having to be created alongside the shift because the elasticity just isn't here to manage that capacity. I think the rigidity and the archaic structure on every level perceivable, in every sector, in every industry, private and personal, it can't be maintained anymore. And it hasn't been able to be for a long time. And I feel like the trauma that the older generations have repressed is starting to, it's like a pressure cooker, and it started to come out. And then the younger generations are literally having an allergic reaction to the way that things are because it's so stifling. And this like co-symbiosis, interdependent like shift is occurring, and it's like putting immense pressure on the collective and on the establishment to respond. But the majority of those demands for a response are in alignment with the pre-existing system in the first place. So it's like people want things to change, but they keep looking to the old system for the new changes. It's not going to happen. People want to be saved and want to be helped and want to be supported, but the ways in which they're expecting that to happen or looking for it to happen are the same ways and systems and processes that led the country to this mental crisis stage pre-pandemic anyway. It's fucked up on a massive fucking scale. There's like so many layers and levels to like not no like about it, to the whole rigmarole. It's just like, I've been here like 3 years. How many years have I been in here? I've been here for quite a while, and I've not like had a holiday or left the country or had a break from my life experience in many, many, many years. And it's so easy to get sucked into that fear, panic, terror. It's more like terror. It's more like wide-eyed. It's a chronic PTSD response. The body goes into the body almost exists from a permanent state of post-traumatic stress, chronic terror in the body. The physiological responses in the body are in alignment with terror. And the longer one goes, in my experience of being exposed to this way of living, and this society and so on and so forth, like the behind the scenes scaffolding, as it were, within the UK, which isn't necessarily very much behind the scenes, but nonetheless, it is cloak and dagger, because, you know, if I were to take this video and show you the street now, you wouldn't be able to perceive or witness what I'm talking about, because it's a different layer. It's it's not particularly visible. You know, you just see cars driving along and people walking down the street. Which I suppose is why it's being gotten away with, but it's basically gaslighting, a form of narcissistic abuse, coercion, control. It's entrapment on a mass scale. If the way in which this country is being run was pared down to a relationship, say for example in a household, it would be entrapment. It would be a form of domestic abuse and violence. If the same tactics were used by an individual or displayed by an individual that the state or the establishment display as a collective, as an entity, as a corporation, that it would qualify for being sectioned, because it's a form of psychological torture and abuse and violence. How I even survived here as a child, I know how, because I was kept in a fucking bubble. But like I was saying, going back to that dynamic of not leaving the country, or not having a break from the incessant, because it is incessant. It does not, unless you say no, it doesn't stop. Unless you choose to move on from it or walk away or have a break, it doesn't stop. Unless you choose to create a different way of existing within the pre-existing system, it doesn't stop. It doesn't abate. If anything, it intensifies. Well, not anymore, but it's in many ways it's fantastic that there is a welfare state at all. And there are many fantastic things about this country, and everything that I have said prior to this isn't in isolation. You know, that there are other things. But as I said at the beginning of this video, it was down to feeling trapped, which is a feeling. It's a mental thing. I mean, I could walk out of the front door and, you know, go and sit in the park. It's not. But as a way of life over an extended period of time, without a break to engage in the world on a different level, on a different scale, it can become very frightening to be alive here, and very real. Very real indeed. I'm not saying that other countries are perfect, but there are certainly examples, both in Europe, mostly Scandinavia, Germanic countries, which actually have the data, the evidence, the statistics, the case studies to prove that, to prove that there are holistically better ways of doing things. And when I say holistically better, I don't just mean the outcomes or the efficiency is improved. I mean on an holistic level for the individual and the collective, respectively. There are more appropriate approaches and processes which bring about the same outcomes or desired effects. For example, in a lot of the Germanic countries, reading and writing isn't taught to children until a lot later on. When I studied education, I was surprised that toddlers, children as young as 18 months onwards, are included in league tables around performance-based activities. That's not normal. In Finland, for example, children might not be exposed to literature or reading material until much, much later on. But their studies and their development in child psychology and pedagogy show that brain elasticity is actually more effective later on in childhood, in the later end of early years. So much so that they can introduce reading and writing and form drawing, which is like shapes, letters, symbols, at a much later age, and yet they can supersede children of the same age who've been exposed to the same learning material from much younger. They can supersede that and actually overtake in league tables. And that could be as old as 7, 8 or 9 years old. They will be fully literate and they will have a far greater standard of English in a non-native English-speaking country and of their own country's language, both in written and oral or verbal communications, than what British children in my education and like professional experience have, having been exposed at a much younger age. Exposing the developing mind at such an important stage in development to the pressures of expectation and competition induces a state of stress, which makes the brain less permeable to learning and education. It induces a state of trauma in that child, which is now visible, that has long-term effects. Even children of my generation, that hard-hitting, no-nonsense, stiff upper lip approach to academia and learning, that institutionalization is detrimental in the development of this nation state, this country. It will impact, it will affect, it will curtail the evolution of its people, basically. Certainly in comparison to the global peers, as it were. This blueprint is evident in every sector and every industry within society, not just education. The police system, the fire services, the National Health Service, the judicial system, the prison system, and the employment system, as well as the welfare state. It's riddled with a toxic mentality and approach. The dynamic and the application and the expression is discombobulated. It's out of sync with itself. It's derived from an imperialist, nationalistic, patriotic, royalistic, industrialized way of existing that doesn't apply to the level of consciousness, the demands of environmental agency, personal agency, human development on an individual and a global scale. There are other countries across the planet that have faced the same challenges as Britain, the UK, England, and yet have expedited a recovery and emerged from those challenges more advanced than what they were prior to the pandemic occurring. The instance that I'm witnessing here in the UK is an intensification of the pre-existing systems as opposed to a new way of doing things. So as opposed to taking a step back, They've just tightened their grip on the old ways, which won't work. There's a likelihood that things will escalate or intensify before tipping point is reached. So there's a turning point and there's a tipping point. The turning point is the turn, the curve, and the tipping point is where it tips, basically. Important changes are being made, but not where they need to be made most. In my opinion, certainly not. I've not seen evidence of that anyway. I feel that the surface level projection, the projected reality, is where the danger lies, because once that tipping point is reached and the turning point is past, so the turning point is an opportunity to reinvent, to reignite, to reevaluate, and to implement the necessary changes. When the tipping point is reached and that turning point wasn't made the most of in the best way possible, that surface level, that veneer will be our undoing in this country. The ramifications, there's no way of knowing. There's absolutely no way of knowing. We'll see how it unfolds. We're in the first week of April. It's Easter. We've had over a year of the pandemic. Officially, the breakout was in China. That's what's been reported. And that was towards the end of 2019, approximately November 2019. The lockdown came into place in March 2020, so we've exceeded the 1 year anniversary of that. Although there has been criticism in what I've discussed, it's not to say that there is a wrong or a right way to live or do things. And for me to demand that my way of perceiving or seeing things, or my way of understanding how things should be done or believing how things should be done, is the only way or the right way or the better way, that's not what it is that I'm trying to convey. What I'm trying to convey is my own level of awareness at this point in my personal journey, in conjunction with my lived experience and my environment over this period of time. Over and out for now.